Excellent, excellent. All right, well, here we are again. We don't quite yet have our really cool intro music or anything like that, but you know what? I think my voice is music to the ears of everyone listening right now anyway, so we'll just go with that.
I can do a
Uh,
little do 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 like.
yeah, yeah, don't do that. Don't do that.
Okay, okay.
No,
I'm
no,
sorry,
no more.
everyone.
Well, so here we are again. You've got Kevin and Kaleigh, but normally we would have Kyra, who's a little bit under the weather. So we've got Jason Kasuf joining us today to join in the conversation. Jason's coming in. It's going to have an interesting perspective, I think, not having a ton of experience in the nonprofit world itself and really and events per se, but I think that's a real valuable perspective to have as well. Jason, why don't you say hello to the good people?
Hello, everyone. Kevin and Kaleigh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'll do my best to fill in for Kyra.
There you go. Well, some mighty large shoes to fill for sure,
Absolutely.
for sure. So, really, the topic we're going to be discussing today is the way we think about charities is dead wrong. And we alluded to this a little bit in the last broadcast, where there were some little hints of this in that one, and I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into it because this has actually been one of the more important videos that I've seen in my fundraising career. And it was a TED Talk done by Dan Pallotta all the way back in 2013. And Dan came into this thing with a real interesting perspective. He had been in the fundraising world for many years. In fact, he had a company which he had founded, and as a result, over a 9-year period, for two different causes. One was for AIDS research and services. Another one was for breast cancer. But over those 9 years, he and his team helped raise over $518 million,
Wow.
which is just incredible.
I mean, I've
Uh,
seen the video, but that's just, yeah, just hearing the number again, it's pretty crazy.
yeah, 518 million over a 9-year period is tremendous. And a lot of the reason why he was able to do that was through having a truly innovative approach to this. And a lot of it really focused around what he dubs as being social innovation and social entrepreneurship, which we don't really think about that very much. I mean, you don't hear anybody calling themselves as a nonprofit a social entrepreneur. And he really breaks that down during this TED talk and lets us know that, hey, we might be thinking about charities and nonprofits completely incorrect. So I'm going to get into that here now. Um, and I'm going to be doing a lot of quoting in this one, to be honest with you, because what he has are just great gold nuggets, and it's hard for me to really embellish on them. So I do apologize, but Dan just really lays it out perfectly throughout his presentation. And one of the first things he starts off with right off the bat is that the things that we've been taught about giving and charity and the nonprofit sector are actually undermining the causes that we love. And we'll build on these a little bit later on, but when we say that, what he's referring to is that everything has to be done on the minimal, that you can't spend money on this, that you can only spend a certain percentage of the funds that you receive on overhead. And he really challenges these beliefs that we have. And what he's trying to say is that by really holding hard and true to those thoughts and ideas, that you're really stifling the ability of the nonprofit to affect its mission.
Yeah. And
And
also, like, these missions are such large scale, like, having a small mindset for such a big mission isn't going to help conquer that, need for the support, right?
well, exactly. I mean, they are massive in scale, the issues. I mean, how do you tackle hunger? How do you tackle homelessness if you're going to keep yourself tiny? and you have a belief system that keeps you tiny, that doesn't allow you to grow, to get big enough to be able to tackle the issue. There's no company out there that wants to service a major sector of potential customers. If you want to conquer that, and you need to get out there and make it happen, you don't do it by thinking small. And that's, again, goes back to that social entrepreneurship. And he says that there's two rule books. There's one for nonprofits and there's one for profits. And I know some of you thinking, well, duh, of course there is. But the thing is that when it comes to those two rule books, if you hold on to those rules, then you're really setting yourself up for failure. And the first topic that he wants to really break down and look at it from both rule books is compensation. Something that some of you may find very, very appealing here. For the for-profit, what the rule book says is that the more value that you bring in, the more money that you make, right? That makes sense. We think about that. Hey, if someone's going to bring in a lot of value, they're going to expect to get paid more. But that doesn't apply to the nonprofit world. In the nonprofit world, they don't want to use money to incentivize people to produce more. They just expect it to happen. Produce more because you're doing great things for the community. That's great.
But ultimately they need to be looking out for number one, which means not everyone is going to go for that feel-good role, although it'd be ideal for them and they'd be really excited to do it, but they do need to live their life as well. And for-profit pays and nonprofit unfortunately doesn't.
Yeah. Oh boy, do we get into that a little bit more here?
I know. I'm maybe a little ahead of the game, but I'm just like,
no. I love it. So, but you have, when you think about someone coming in and or as a nonprofit professional being offered a substantial wage, we seem to have this visceral reaction against anyone making money helping others. And what's interesting is that we don't react in a visceral way to people making a lot of money not helping others. And when he said that, I was like, you know what? He's right.
It's too true.
He's got a point. I mean, we're more than happy to see someone making a lot of money just because they can sell more widgets or sell more advertising, or because they can, work out a logistics plan to get a widget from point A to point B faster than the next guy. So we're perfectly happy with that, and good for them. But when someone comes in and says, hey, look, I think I'm going to come in and I'm going to bring a lot of value to this organization, I'm going to help it do great things, we're going to affect this mission better, but we have this, oh, they're being greedy reaction. And so he goes in a little more in depth there. And we think of this as really a system of ethics, but we don't realize that this creates a choice between doing well for yourself or doing good for the world. Yeah. And just like what you were saying, Kaleigh, and therefore, the vast majority of the best and the brightest, they're gonna go into the for-profit world because they aren't willing to make the sacrifice. And that's something that I think the nonprofit world has to face. It's not that the people that are there aren't high quality; they definitely are. But when you can add in people that have the best and the brightest, and you can get them added into your network, we're going to do even better things. And so yeah, he really gets into that a lot. And what was interesting, there's some stats on this. Business Week surveyed 10 years, professionals who were 10 years out of school. These were all MBAs, okay? And some of them were in the for-profit world and some of them were in the nonprofit world. And here's what they found, is that folks that were 10 years out, the average compensation package for for-profit individuals was $400,000 a year. And now they weren't CEOs. They were just some of them might have been, but they didn't differentiate. Mm-hmm. When they looked at CEOs of hunger charities, 10 years out, same graduation. Oh, and by the way, all from the same college. These are all from the Stanford Business College. So definitely high level individuals. The average compensation for 10-year out MBAs that are CEOs of hunger charities is only $84,000.
Yeah.
That is a massive gap.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things he says, it's hard to get $400,000 talent to sacrifice $316,000 each year. And I don't know, Jason, well, let's pull you into this. I know I'm going to kind of catch you off guard here, but
Sure, no
it would
problem.
be real interesting to hear your take. I mean, what would you think of an individual who had an opportunity to go make 400K or make 84,000 as a CEO of a nonprofit? What's sort of your initial take on that individual? Would you think of them as being greedy or sharp?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a good question, Kevin, and I would say maybe is the right answer to call them greedy, but I think we might have to default to the answer of calling them sharp, and getting them to take the opportunity that they can do good for themselves and do good for others when they're talking that kind of income, for sure.
Yeah, and the fun.
And
Go ahead, Kaleigh.
I was just going to say, like, those individuals who are, bringing in that 400K, like, they can look awesome in their community by donating some money. So, ultimately, they're going to take that for-profit role. And then, without directly heading the organization, they can still provide some type of impact. But, we need them to be actively engaged with a nonprofit. Not saying that current leadership isn't doing awesome things for their organizations. It's just we're talking about some of the brightest minds that might be able to advance these missions in a different way.
Well, yeah, I mean, and ultimately what it boils down to is, look, there have been charities focused on homelessness. There have been charities focusing on trying to end hunger, to trying to beat disease, that have been at this for 40, 50 years, sometimes
Yeah.
much longer than that. And yes, there have been some small successes, but they're still homeless. They're still the hungry. There's still rampant poverty at the same levels, if not worse.
Mhm.
And so, do we keep doing the same thing? Do we keep holding to these same beliefs that have kept things where they're at the status quo? Or do we have to try to innovate? Do we have to try to try new things? Do we have to have a different mindset to try to affect the mission? Are we just having the charity to have the charity, or are we really going to make a big difference? And he's suggesting that there needs to be some very fundamental change in order to do that. And one of the things that he mentions when talking about that new graduate coming out, what job are they going to take? He makes a really interesting observation. When he talks about the person taking the 400K over the 84,000, he suggests that they're actually pretty smart, because that person making 400K can now donate 100,000 a year. 100,000 a year. They can probably sit on the board of that charity that they donated to because they've given $100,000 a year. I guarantee you there's not a nonprofit in the world that wouldn't take them on as a board member. Still make a difference, and then ultimately supervise the CEO of the charity and still be making far more money. So they could probably have a bigger impact on the charity and still be philanthropic, still make a lot more money, and they're going to be the supervisor of the person that graduated with the same degree, had the same opportunity, but took the 84,000. So
And
it's a really
celebrated in their community as a major philanthropist as well, right?
exactly. And so they're going to get a ton of kudos, and they're going to get the hobnob with all those folks. So when we think about it in that way, it doesn't mean that they're greedy. They could actually be having an even bigger impact by doing what they're doing. So I found that to be really interesting when he said it. The next piece that he really breaks down is marketing and advertising. And boy, he's going into this one a lot. And we'll try to keep this one a little bit shorter, guys, here, just because of
Sure.
just time.
Sure, yeah.
So, the rule book for the for-profit companies is spend, 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 spend. Get in front of people, advertising and marketing, keep spending money. Just spend as much as you can, because that is going to turn into dollars for you, as long as it's good marketing. I mean, there's obviously been some flops out there, but you're always spending on marketing. Now, for the nonprofit world, the popular view is that, yeah, if you can get donated advertising at 4 a.m. in the morning, people are okay with that, as far as the donors go. But they don't want their money going to advertising. They want it to go to direct services. And the problem with that he identifies is that people, when they say that, they're assuming that through advertising that they're still going to be bringing in the same size piece of pie. But the traditional knowledge is that you're not. You're going to get a much larger piece of pie with the advertising. And that's something that one thought right there, that one theme, is going to run through the rest of these points here on marketing and advertising.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just from me coming from, a world where I was talking with agencies, like big agencies, in like New York and stuff like that, like LA, Silicon Valley, those types of things, like big agencies. It's crazy to look at what they have money to spend on, or what these companies are coming to them with to spend money on, and what types of analysis they have on who their audience is and how to engage them and how to get the most out of them. But then when I came to we are part of Over the Edge because we do work with nonprofits, and this is where a lot of our passion comes from. Speaking with these nonprofit groups, and just kind of realizing that they're not given that same type of mindset. It wasn't that surprising to me, but it was also surprising in the same way that we weren't, that these nonprofits aren't even like given even a lower type of, cost bracket that these agencies could help them even advance their mission. So my brain's all over the place with this one, but continue, Kevin.
Yeah, no. It's a hard one to wrap your brain around. And I get it though. I mean, I was in this culture. I mean, I was in this culture for 20 years, in the nonprofit culture. And I'll tell you, back in the day, they called me Scrooge, because I managed major regions and had staff all over the place, and I didn't want to spend any money on anything either at that time. But that's what's kind of driven home to you. You feel that if you're spending money, it's a waste of money. That money it's thought of is that if you spend money on advertising, or you spend money on this, or you spend money on that, that's money not being spent on the people that you're trying to serve. And I get it. I totally get that. That makes total sense to me. But what Dan's trying to say in this TED Talk is that the money spent, if done properly, can get you a much larger piece of the pie. And so if your return on investment is significant, that's a great thing. That's going to make you grow. That's going to make your organization grow and not stay at the status quo. And I just rhymed there. I'm a rapper and I didn't know it. So anyway, one of the things that he goes into is that I mentioned that he did this series of adventure races with both AIDS groups and also with breast cancer, and we mentioned the 581 million. And he goes into how he got that. He got that by buying full-page ads in major newspapers and magazines. It's not cheap. It's not cheap. But it also challenged you to find any group out there that was able to pull in 581 million over a 9-year period, just coming up with something out of the blue. And that's pretty that's pretty impressive. But they got the word out. and they got market share. We'll talk about market share here in a minute, but they got market share by doing that. Now, I'm not telling you that you need to go off and go, buy full-page ads in the New York Times. That would be amazing. But what they did is they strategically spent their money where they knew that they were going to get a lot of value out of it, and they made it work, and it increased their market share. And and he asked, he goes, how many would I have gotten if I was putting flyers in laundromats and on windshields? Nothing. They wouldn't have got anything. So, one of the things he goes into then is charitable giving has remained stuck at 2% of GDP since measuring has begun. 2% of GDP is spent on charitable giving. What's interesting is that only 20% of that goes to health and humans, goes to human service type organizations. A lot of it, the majority of it, is going towards a lot of college endowments and things of that nature. So really, he says it's only about 20% of that 2% of GDP is really going to doing the most of the work out there, helping the community. But if it's been stuck at 2%, he goes, that tells you that because of the fact that nonprofits have not been able to increase market share, it's because they're being held back by not being able to be on the same playing field with the for-profits to get the word out there to try to increase that. He says, how can we expect one sector to take market share from another sector if they aren't allowed to market?
Yeah.
It's like, duh, he's right. He's absolutely right. How do you get more market if you're not allowed to market?
Yeah.
Now, Jason, you come from sort of a for-profit mindset. Is any of this ringing true to you? I mean, I'm sure you heard this quite a bit back in the day. Any thoughts on this little section?
Yeah, I mean, for me, definitely, it's all ringing true to me, and certainly marketing and advertising was a massive spend on how we did things, and just in general, probably some comments later on the video, because quite enlightening for me coming into not-for-profit, as you said, very new to this sector. So there's definitely there's a lot of insight, but I think he hits the nail on the head, at least from the standpoint that I'm that I'm very familiar with, and how we would spend dollars to make dollars.
Absolutely. All right, so the third one is taking risk on new revenue ideas. Again, he kind of breaks it down between the two different rule books. He says, Disney can make a $200 million movie that flops, but if a nonprofit tries something that does not make at least a 75% profit, then your character is drawn into question. And that is so true.
Terrifyingly true. Like, when I see the budget, or when I see how much a athlete, for example, I know it's right up Jason's alley, fighters get paid so much. It's just there's just so much money out there to do things that aren't making the world a better place, and it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, I mean, but that percentage thing, I'm sure everyone that's listening to this has heard that at one point. I heard it. I said it back in the day. That seems to be this overarching golden standard of what's a success and what's a failure. And it really can't be that way. It's because of that a lot of nonprofits, they're reluctant to try anything brave or daring. And the one line, and I put this in bold, I love this quote, when you prohibit failure, you kill innovation. And I'm just going to say that one more time.
Ding.
Yeah, I'm going to say it one more time because I love it. When you prohibit failure, you kill innovation. So what that means is that unless because gosh, the groups that I've worked with, I can't tell you how many times everything was great, everything sounded awesome, but then it all boiled down to, well, if it didn't hit this certain level of ROI, then it's not worth it. It's not worth it. And which is interesting to me. because, well, we'll break that down a little bit more later on.
Mm-hmm.
So what he says is that, if you kill innovation in fundraising, you can't create more revenue. If you can't raise more revenue, you can't grow. If you can't grow, you can't possibly solve large social problems. And we mentioned that before, hunger, homelessness, disease processes, abuse. How do you solve that if you don't grow? You don't solve it. All you're doing is reacting to it.
Yeah.
And reacting to it in the long run is not the best way of taking care of a situation. You solve it. And right now, there's a lot of it's a lot of reactions, which is great. It's what we can do right now. But how do we get beyond reacting? How do we get to solving? And that's what he's going into here. The next thing is time, and this is a quick one. He kind of goes into Amazon, and he makes a lot of these references that you can relate to. He says Amazon, and I didn't know this at all, but Amazon spent 6 years before a penny of profit was shared with investors. These investors, they understood that it can take time to create market dominance. But if a nonprofit were to spend 6 years developing the infrastructure to be able to tackle these large social issues, they'd be fried. They'd be torn up if there wasn't anything produced in the
Yeah.
next 6 months. I mean, people would stop wanting to invest, even though they've got a great concept, they've got a great idea. Everything says it should work. They're not going to give them that much time because you've just been spending money on infrastructure. You've been spending money on overhead, and yeah, I mean, Kaleigh, you had a reaction to that. I mean, I'm assuming you've heard this before.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just mean like, I've seen through making outreach to a lot of different nonprofits, it's unfortunate to see when some of them are, listed as permanently closed. And just kind of some of what is being said about time, kind of makes me think of those businesses, those nonprofits. Um, you know, Maybe they weren't given enough time to kind of turn it around, and they'd pulled the plug too early on the mission. That's why I had that reaction.
Yeah, it's a hard one when we see that. I know both you and I mean, we're working with these folks all the time, and then all of a sudden they're no longer there, and
Yeah.
their website's taken down.
Yes.
And which kind of gets us the time and the investment that I mentioned earlier. It kind of it rolls us into the next piece, which is the ability to attract risk capital. And for profits, they can pay people profits to attract their capital early on for investments in their new ideas. Now what they're talking about there is people will invest, or they'll go public, right, in the stock market, and people will buy stock, or they will invest in a company for the ability to take dividends or profits down the road when the company grows, and their idea is panned out and it's going great. For-profits have that ability, so they're able to get capital investment from individuals for exchange for a little bit of profit going out. Well, the way the nonprofit world is set up, that's not a possibility. There's,
Mhm.
it's in the name.
Yeah.
It's in the name, and that's a big deal. And what he's suggesting is that why not have the ability for investors to come into a nonprofit to help them get what? Because what if they've got a really great idea, but they just can't do it until they get monies raised to allow them to do it? But it's going to take time. It's going to take investment. It's going to take infrastructure to make that happen. But people, because of their mindset, they don't want to put money into that because they think it's overhead. But what if this great idea could turn out to be the true innovation, which is going to help end this or end that, or help to get a new research done to help end a disease process? It's stifled. It's completely stifled because they don't have that ability. They don't have that capacity. So when you put all of these 5 points together for the nonprofit, You can't use your money to lure talent from the for-profit sector. You can't advertise on nearly the same scale as the for-profit to get new customers. You can't take the kinds of risks to get those new customers that the for-profit sector can. You don't have the same amount of time as the for-profit sector can take for these customers. You don't have a capital market to fund anything to scale like the for-profit sector can. You're just putting all of your nonprofits at an extreme disadvantage. Now, if there's any doubts, he brings up an interesting stat, and he says, during the 40 years prior to this TED Talk, 144 nonprofit organizations have crossed the $50 million mark. That's what he's using as sort of a standard. 144 over 40 years. That's what? That's 3.5 nonprofits a year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Quick math, nice.
Yeah, I know, right? During that same period, the for-profits, 46,136 different groups, entrepreneurs were able to cross that $50 million barrier. 46,000. I'm not going to do
I'm tearing up a little bit. Honestly, that's crazy.
It's nuts, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking companies that are making widgets. We're talking companies that are selling SEO services. We're talking companies that, while they're employing people and they're probably doing some good things out there in the world, they're not doing things that are really making an impact right there in your backyard. They're not helping to solve disease and so forth. And so anyhow, it's a little shocking. But if you look at all of the things above that, where we're talking about all the different reasons, all the different the two different rule books, you can see why. It's just it just makes sense why that is. And organizations are trying to deal with social problems that are massive in scale, and nonprofits, they can't generate scale. All the scale goes to the for-profit sector. So one of the things that that we were talking about before is the percentage of donation that that goes towards the cause versus overhead. And he goes, this is the most dangerous question that tends to police nonprofits, is what percentage goes towards overhead and what percentage goes towards the cause. And it makes us think that overhead is negative and not part of the cause. And he's suggesting that overhead is actually positive, especially if it's used for growth. Because growth is going to make sure that you can accommodate more, that you can accomplish more, that you can affect more lives, that you can maybe get to a point where you solve the issue rather than just react to the issue. That only comes with growth. And so he's suggesting that while it may be overhead, overhead doesn't have to be a negative 4-letter word. It's not a 4-letter word, but you get what I'm saying. So that one question, it really forces charities to forego what they need to grow just to keep the overhead low. There I go again with my
Whoa, rhyming.
I know, there I go again. So the thought is to spend as little on fundraising, because the less you spend on fundraising, the more that can go towards the cause.
So how much does a bake sale raise,
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Like you think small, you're gonna get a small return. It's been a big theme in some of our previous episodes for sure, and this one obviously. But
oh, absolutely. If when you're spending as little as possible on fundraising, because you can spend more on the cause, that would be true if the spending more money on fundraising didn't result in better results, right? If you didn't raise more money, then yeah, that makes sense that you don't want to spend it. But we know that it is true that if you have a good idea and you really act on it and you do something with it, you're going to raise more money. You're going to create more awareness. You're going to create more buzz in the community. And as a result, you're going to achieve more. So it's not true that if you spend as little as possible on fundraising, that more money is going to go towards the cause. No, more money from that bake sale is going to go towards the cause. But, if you can raise 250,000 with an event that you spend, I don't know, 50,000 on, I'll just throw it out there.
Yeah.
Which do you think the people that are out there that need your services, what do you think they'd rather receive? Do you think they'd rather receive 95% of a $150 bake sale or 60% of a $250,000 event? It just makes sense. What
Yeah.
makes the most sense? I'm thinking they're going to take the 60%.
Yeah, they're making the pie bigger.
Yeah, you're making the pie bigger by spending a little bit more. So, and this one point here that he made, I especially loved. He said, fundraising is the one thing that has the potential to raise even more funds for the cause. Well, duh, right?
Yeah.
It is the one thing. Well, absolutely. And if you raise more funds for the cause, you can do more things. He gives two examples from his days when he was running events, and this part gets me a little bit upset. I'll talk about that in a second. So he launched these AIDS rides with $50,000 in risk capital. So he actually got people to invest in what they were thinking and what they wanted to do, which it isn't something which is widely well received. But he raised 50,000, and in the 9 years with that $50,000 investment, he raised $108 million after all expenses were paid, and that money went towards AIDS services. So a $50,000 investment, but in the end ended up with $108 million in profit that went to the cause after all expenses paid. That's incredible. For breast cancer, he did these breast cancer 3 days, and he got an initial investment from people at $350,000. And in 5 years, he had multiplied that $350,000 554 times. In 5 years, he was at the 194 million mark. Again, after all expenses paid and all profits paid out to his initial investors. $194 million that went towards breast cancer research. That's incredible.
That's a lot.
It's mind-boggling. And this is one person who came in with a socially innovative, socially entrepreneurial mindset. And he's just suggesting we need to be thinking about this in different ways. We can't just keep doing the same thing and hold to the same truths and hold to the same dogmatic beliefs that we've all been taught, and it's been beaten into our heads for all these years. So he goes, if you were a philanthropist and you were really interested in breast cancer, what makes more sense? Donating $350,000 towards breast cancer research, or putting that towards fundraising efforts that can bring in far more, like the 194 million? What makes the most sense? Well, probably the 194 million from that $350,000 investment, right? You would think so from a philanthropist, and normally that philanthropist is going to have a business mind, so they're going to understand how that investment in their fundraising efforts can really help to benefit the research that they're trying to do. So I found that to be a really interesting concept, and thinking of it in that way.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking, like, for some reason my brain just made this connection. It just kind of made me think a little bit of like the Shark Tank and Dragon's Den. They're
Yeah.
talking about, invest this much and you'll get this much of a return, and yada yada yada. This is our projected growth and all that stuff. Yeah, just making that connection now
Yeah,
for some reason.
but technically speaking, they're not allowed to have profit. So how do you,
Yeah, yeah.
for the nonprofit? So we got to get out of that mindset. Um, so this is the part that upset me that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So in 2002, Dan's company that was putting on these things for the breast cancer and the AIDS services, he raised $71 million in 1 year for breast cancer research. And he went out of business after their best year yet. Their best year raising money was $71 million, and he had to go out of business that year because the media got a hold of the fact that they had a 40% overhead rate. How could you?
Oh my.
Or 40% overhead? That's terrible. That's terrible. You know, that's awful. You know, how can you take money that the people are donating and it goes towards you know, it goes he was building it. It was growing. Each year it had grown. He had gone up to $71 million in 1 year. So yeah, he was growing. Yeah, there was investment. Yes, there was infrastructure to be built. But look at the results. But the only thing that they were focused on was the 40%. And so now all of a sudden his sponsors pulled out because they didn't want to be associated with that. They were scared of it. They loved the idea, they loved the concept, but they had to begrudgingly back away. They saw the effect that it was having. They saw the great things that were happening, but they had to back away because of the 40% thing.
And you didn't,
And
yeah.
yeah, and so he was just excoriated. And so you know, was able to as overhead. Sponsors pulled out. Then the sponsors, the organizations themselves, they try to run these same events on their own. All right, so they try to come in and do it without the help of Dan. Well, here's what happened. This just,
Mm-hmm.
oh my goodness. So the overhead, you know, this overhead, I'm doing air quotes here, like you can see me. The overhead was now much higher than the 40%. He didn't go into exactly what it was, but it was higher than the 40%. So they pulled out because they were getting excoriated because of the 40%. But so now they're higher than that. And in 1 year, they went down 84% in fundraising. So they were at 71 million the year before with Dan's company.
Yeah.
And they were down to like 7 million the next year.
Oh.
I think a little bit less actually.
Hmm.
Yeah, so they dropped that much in 1 year, and it's just because they were trying to be frugal. Well, not really, because if you end up only raising $7-8 million compared to 71 million, and yeah, so maybe technically speaking, overall, the amount that you spent in overhead was a little bit less. There was still a higher percentage, but again, what's better, having a little bit higher in overhead and making 71 million, or a little bit lower in overhead and making 7 million? I don't know. I'll let you decide. I,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty much a duh moment there. So so he had to fold up. He had to fold up his company. He had 300 staff that were working on these events all over the country, these bike rides, and he had to fold up. And this isn't just about Dan and his company. Don't get me wrong here. I mean, I think what he did with what he had and his real innovation that he brought to all this was tremendous. He's fine. He's doing well. He's on a board of another nonprofit now, and he's trying to affect change. But in the end, it's just a true indicator that here they are raising what they did at an extremely rapid rate, and the way he scaled it up was just tremendous. Is a great example, I think, for nonprofit leaders across the country. But you know, did all this, and yet one number tears it all down, and that's the percentage. And we really got to get out of that mindset. You know, he gets into what happens when we confuse morality with frugality. Makes you think a little bit. You know, I don't know, Kaleigh, what do you think about that? You know, when you know, what happens when we confuse that morality with frugality? Did I
My
catch you off guard
goodness.
there?
A little bit, yeah. It definitely, I was thinking about it. You
Yeah,
said, think about that for a second, and I was.
yeah,
So it, I don't even know how to sum it up. Because I want to make sure I'm like referencing,
yeah. No.
you know,
I wasn't
but I
fair to you
know
there.
exactly what we're saying, like what he's saying. But
Well,
yeah,
the morality
I don't think I can
section.
add anything.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
well, I think it's interesting because it's just back to that two sets of rule books, and
Exactly.
in much of the world, we're just essentially taught to calculate return on investment, and it's about the dollars earned, and it's just unfortunate, I guess, that these organizations doing the wonderful things that they do with the talented people that they do them with are held to a higher standard, I would say, than than the rest of the economy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Jason
And
took the words right out of my mouth. No.
that's exactly what you were thinking, right, Kaleigh? Yeah.
Exactly.
So in the end, we will never be able to scale up to face the major social problems of today if we hold nonprofits to really the demoralizing objective of keeping the overhead low. And one of the things he talks about during the discussion is, do we want our epitaph to read, they kept overhead low? Is that really what we want to have on our epitaph? And it was interesting in the TED talk. That was the biggest response that I mean, there were lots of gasps and oh wow kind of moments. And when that one came out, everyone was just they were laughing pretty heavily because it's true.
Yeah.
And what he challenges everyone to think about is that when you're considering a charity, don't first ask about their overhead. Ask about the scale of their dreams and what resources they need to make them come true, regardless of their overhead.
Yeah.
Who cares what the overhead is if the problems are actually getting solved? And that can't be any more true. That can't be any more true. And Jason, you had mentioned something to me after I had shared this piece with you, and maybe you can share a little bit about that. But you said that you have a friend, and that's their number one thing is right off the bat overhead. And share kind of what you
Yeah,
heard from them.
absolutely. And that was what struck me, and I guess as we've said a couple times, coming into this new, I wouldn't say I was guilty of having that view, but maybe I was guilty of not being as acutely aware of that view that much of society has about not-for-profits, and had a chance to watch that video, and it definitely resonated with me. But I absolutely have someone, and everybody has their own cause and their own reasons for feeling the way that they do. So not to minimize it, but absolutely the first question or comment he would make about an activity or anything that's related to charity, where I guess he's in a role where he is asked to participate in these things a number of times, is he would chalk it up to not being worth it, and so really at the end of the day, he's worried about the percentage of overhead or cost for the event, and that's really preventing someone who's able to contribute from even contributing. So this TED Talk for me was pretty cool. I didn't know anything about Dan before I watched it, and still haven't done a ton of research on him, but absolutely hit home with what I would say is unfair treatments or perceptions that people have.
So Jason, I'm going to give you a homework assignment.
All right.
I know that you've already sent the TED Talk off to him,
Yes.
but I want you to take that last comment there and really hit home with him and just ask him, hey, I want you to commit to this. Okay. I want you to just ask him to commit to, instead of thinking about return on investment and overhead, ask him to think about nonprofits as far as the scale of their dreams, what resources they need to make them come true, regardless of the overhead, and ask them to really look at it that way, instead of just the overhead costs. So
100% will do. I'll accept that homework assignment.
Yeah, see if you can convert them. See if you can convert them. So,
Love to. It'd be my pleasure.
That's funny.
perfect. Well, we've converted a lot of time here very quickly. I feel like we just started this podcast, and
Yeah.
over this is crazy. You know, but I think this just goes to a really interesting topic. A lot of great ideas and thoughts, and a lot of aha moments for me. Every time I listen, I've listened to it for many, many years. Kaleigh, I think this is one of the first videos I ever sent you
Oh yeah,
personally.
I go back and watch it sometimes just to kind of like, reinvigorate my mindset a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need to be innovative. We need to be thinking about new things and trying new things, and not just doing the same old, because the same old is going to get the same old results. Like I said, 2% GDP spent since it's been measured, 2%. It's not changed. It's not wavered. You know, how do we get beyond that? Well, if we keep doing the same things, guess what? We're not. And we're not going to affect the change that we really want. We're just going to continue to be reactionary. We're not going to have the great innovative ideas and concepts to really affect societal change. And that's really what we want to do. I think almost every nonprofit that's out there, they would really love for the day when they are no longer needed. And I think everybody feels that way. I know I did when I was in their shoes. And so, but how do you get there? And that's what this discussion's all about. That's what Dan talks about in this TED Talk. Now we're going to send that video out to everybody when we're finished with this. Kaleigh is been very gracious to be willing to send this off to everyone who registered and those who didn't anyway. So we will get this sent off to you. Hope you definitely take a chance to listen to it. I think it's what, 18 minutes, guys? Is that about it?
Yeah, it's around that. Yeah.
Yeah, 18 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, take a lunch break and just watch it. Share it with the team. See what they think, and I think you might be inspired by it. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'll
anyhow.
definitely be sending this out to everyone tomorrow.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we don't quite know what we're going to be talking about next month, but we sure to get that out to you here very, very soon. We'll be along the same theme of innovation and looking at trends and what's working and what's not. We thank everybody for checking out this broadcast, and we're looking forward to our next conversation. Say goodbye, Jason. Say goodbye, Kaleigh.
Goodbye. Thanks for
Adios.
having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
All
All
right. Thanks.
Bye.
right. Bye.